Good afternoon. Jennifer told me to repeat everything that y'all said so that the camera can capture it. So they said good afternoon. So I'll remember it now, but when I'm supposed to repeat your questions, I'll forget. So help me remember to repeat your questions. So I'm Stuart Pearman. I don't have much of a voice, which will be interesting for the next day. I'm partner and energy practice leader. I joined the firm in 1994 at a level so low it no longer exists. It used to be that you hung around. We had a claim, then we were 90% energy, and we had a claim that all of our folks had experience in energy. So you hung around for 6 months, and if you were still standing, they promoted you to the entry level from MBA. And miraculously, they promoted me. Over the years, I asked the partner at the time why he didn't fire me, and he said, well, we thought you had potential and stuff, because my first 6 months were a little bit rocky. And one year, I think maybe 5 years ago, we were at a cocktail party, and he'd had a few drinks. I said, Bill, I know you thought my work was terrible. Why didn't you fire me? He said, we were a little short-handed at the time. He said, finally, the truth comes out. So I joined the firm because I love the values. We are a company that we fall short of our values every day, but versus where they are, we come closer than any place I've ever seen in my working life. We believe that we put our clients first. We put their best and highest interests ahead of our own. We believe we do what we say we'll do. We are very collegial. We believe we help each other out. And there are a lot of really smart people here. When I joined the firm, the thing I didn't like about it was we were 90% energy. And I thought, energy is like completely boring. Because back in 1994, energy was not the cool kids like it is now. It was like the boring stuff. And telecom was the cool kids. They were all about to march off a cliff in the dot-com bust, but we didn't know that. So it is perhaps ironic that today I hold the job of energy practice leader, and after spending my first 2 years of studiously avoiding learning anything about energy, which I do not recommend as a strategy because it did not work out too well for me, I would encourage you, if you're interested in energy, to spend 10 or 15 minutes a day. You'll all get subscriptions to SNL, which is the trades, and maybe some other stuff. Utility Dive is a good source. There's no need to be systematic. Just look at it, and if you see something that's interesting, click the link and read it. So I think you all were sent the deck, and I think the ask was to kind of skim through it and think about questions. So do we have index cards? So I need a couple of volunteers. I'm going to pick on Greg and Christina. And so what I need for you guys to do is, what I need for everybody to do is write out questions on the index cards. Just write 1 or 2 questions. It's stuff you'd like to hear about, because I know you'll be disappointed. We are not going to go line by line through a 55-page deck. I'm going to pick some random slides that I think are interesting, talk about them, and give you all a chance to write your questions. And then what Christina and Greg will do, besides writing their own questions, is they'll prioritize them. So just go through them and pick the ones that interest you, no magic, and pick, maybe 4 or 5 and arrange them in priority order, and then we'll go back and forth. And are any of you Car Talk fans? So we'll play Stump the Chumps, and I'll play the part of the chump, and you guys play the part of the people stumping. Any questions about what we're doing? So far, so good. So this is what's in the deck. We work pretty hard to cover the waterfront. This is Greg Leacher, partner in charge of energy and clean tech research, and some of his folks and me. And so this is, if you had an hour or two and wanted to do your first read on the industry, or if if you're like Tony and knew something about it and wanted to do kind of a recap, a 101, this is what we would recommend. This is the electricity value chain, and this might have been the most boring slide we ever had until about 3 years ago. So it used to be like there's generation, transmission, and distribution. Make, move, and sell. And then here, what we had was, like your house or some business or something, the customer, and so they would buy it. Easy peasy. So what's changed now, and the line of demarcation between the utility and the customer was the meter. And the reason it was the meter is that was the technology we had. We had these analog things that spin around. We could see as far as the meter, and the only way we could see that far was to send some guy out to look at it and write down what it said. If we had had the technology of today, 50 years ago, we wouldn't be selling electricity. We'd be selling light hours or refrigerator hours or something like that, but we didn't. So we drew the line there. So now what's happened is people are putting like solar panels on their rooftop. So that's not right because generation's over here. So customers are now suppliers. We're creating microgrids. A microgrid is a little network, like think of a hospital that's maybe got its own backup power and its own little grid that it's got a drawbridge and it can secede from the union. It can just run by itself. Or maybe it's a big solar array in a storage facility. So that's kind of like all three of these things. So the line between customers and the utilities and the other suppliers is blurring and vanishing. The other thing that's changed is it used to be kind of a one-way hub and spoke network. Here's this big generating plant, and then it serves stuff around it. Well, and the customer was the endpoint. Now it's a two-way network, and any node can serve any function. So this has gone from boring to confusing. So there are a couple of things different about electricity. Electricity is the only commodity on the planet that cannot be economically stored. You may have seen Elon Musk's Powerwall, but that cost $7,500. There was an interview of and it buys you like a few hours of like runtime for your house. So there was an interview of some guy that bought it and he said, I love it. How long have you had it? Oh, a couple years. Why do you have it? Well, in case the power goes out. Have you ever used it? No. So if you can afford a $7,500 box that sits around in your house and does nothing for 2 years, you would be in the big spenders category. So electricity not being storable, asking the people in the industry what that means is like asking fish about water. Fish can't tell you about water. They've never seen anything else unless they're flying fish, of course. So it is so pervasive in everything that we do, in how we have extra generation capacity, and how we build and everything that we do. And over the next 10 or 20 years, that will change. There will be economic storage. Prices, for instance, in wholesale electricity, it's the most price volatile commodity known on the planet because it's the only commodity that does not obey the no arbitrage price rule, which says there can't be any information in the futures price that's not in the spot price. Because if there was, you would borrow the money, pay the cost to carry, put it in storage, sell the futures, and it'd be risk-free arbitrage. So for electricity, there would be information in the futures price that's not in the spot, and some of it's wrong. In 1997, when my econ professor and I came up with this, finance professor and I came up with this, we went back to the client and we said, electricity prices are going to be volatile. And they said, you're nuts. Sure, it went up to $150 last summer, but that'll never happen again. And in 2 years, it went to $10,000. Electricity always flows through the path of least resistance. Can any of you buy like green energy, like solar or wind from your utilities, or do you know? So how does it work?
Well, you're essentially they're saying that they're sending it to you, but they're not sending it to you. They're just able to generate more of it for your, it pays for, subsidizes part of their generation.
Is it Evan?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. There's no way to tag the electron and say, now send this to Evan's house, and it goes through the wires there. It's like water. It goes downhill, the path of least resistance. So if you buy it, like Evan said, they make sure that an amount equivalent to what you're using is being generated, but it's probably going to Tom's house. Tom is stealing Evan's clean energy. And all Evan's getting is these little certificates. It says, well, there was clean energy somewhere in the system. The electric grid is a natural monopoly. So we used to think it was all a natural monopoly, and then we deregulated generation. And now, if you believe this stuff, it's not exactly clear that it's a natural monopoly anymore, and no one knows what to do with that or what the business model is going to be. You'll hear more about that from Kristen. Outages are not acceptable. In a lot of places, we claim we want to have a market. We want to have a wholesale market. We want to have a retail market like they have in, is anybody in a retail deregulated state? No? New Jersey, Texas? So in a market, a couple of things can happen. One is you can have stockouts. You can drive to the gas station and there can be no gasoline. You can drive to the food store and there can be no milk, like if it's going to snow in Chapel Hill. And another thing that can happen is prices can spike. Gasoline can cost $5. So we say we want a market, but in electricity, we want a market except we can never run out and we can never have high prices. So if you check your econ textbook, I don't think that qualifies. Any questions so far? First, I want to repeat that up until Ryan raised his hand, there were no questions. It was completely silent, James. Go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry to break the streak. Can you expound a little bit, Stuart, on the yet after the storage point, as far as, in your opinion, what you see and what you know? Who it might be, when they might do it, and what that might look like?
Yeah, so you might want to ask Chris V. You'd get a different answer from him probably. Although we do have a $1 bet on this for about 10 years out. So it depends on how much you believe in Elon Musk. If you believe in Elon Musk and we're all going to live on Mars, then the Gigafactory is going to create an experience curve effect, and lithium ion is coming rapidly into the money. Storage is in the money now, maybe. In Hawaii, we're seeing solar plus storage. Now they're, it's 36 cents there, and U.S. average is 12. So that's a lot of headroom. And some load pockets in the U.S. You see a bunch of people say that, but then when you look at them, they're investment bankers or vendors, and so maybe they got an axe to grind. I am skeptical about lithium ion. It's been around for a long time. I'm a big believer in the experience curve. We'll talk about it in a second, but to me, it's a little bit of a mature technology. I think it's going to come out of material science and nanotechnology, and you see folks that can make stuff that works like a flow battery and a capacitor, which I'm not an engineer, but like a battery lasts a long time, and a capacitor spikes real quick. And the holy grail of storage would be a box that could do both of those things. And so they're science experiments, and they're wildly expensive. But to me, it's hard to believe there's not a disruptive technology in the next 5 to 10 years, and I think it's storage, and I think it comes out of material science, which I'd explain to you how nanotechnology works and all that, but I don't actually know. Does that answer your question?
Sure does, thanks.
So,
I have a quick question to follow up.
Sure.
So,
You want to know why Tom's stealing your green energy? He wants to know why Tom is stealing his green energy.
how are these changes changing either the client base of Scott Manor? Are you getting new clients that you hadn't worked with before? And then how are you advising towards this future of, people potentially creating their own energy at their house?
I meant to say at the beginning that I wanted only easy questions. So the client base, one segment of the client base isn't changing. Utilities have to deal with this, and so we're doing a lot of strategy work for them. Our most recent energy industry update was themed "It's the End of the World as We Know It," and I Feel Fine, which I guess was an REM Top 100 hit in 1987. And it's meant to be, it's a time of hope and possibilities. There was a period of let's all put our head in the sand and wait for this to go away. And now everybody's waking up going, wait a minute, this is their business. So we're helping them. We're also picking up new clients. We are working on a, how much of this can I say? We're for one of the largest and best vertically integrated solar panel manufacturers from make to run. We're doing some support around competitive market intelligence that we have a bevy of lawyers looking over. Turns out if you'd like to know where the line is, you know, I don't know if you read about that guy that just got fired from Google. So until I read about that, I did not know that there was an Economic Espionage Act, but there is one. And so I've had to learn where that line is. And it turns out you can't divulge trade secrets or confidential information. And it turns out when you ask the lawyers what that is, they don't know. So we're picking up new clients as we have new entrants. Not so much on the corporate side, but more like First Solar. And then our traditional clients need the same kind of help. You'll also hear a lot from Kristen about inside the belly of the beast, how you plan and do everything you have to do in distribution is now different. And so there's a lot of process work and change management around that. Is that good, Evan? So there are, in the old world, there were three kinds of power plants. Baseload plants are like coal and nuclear and some gas plants, and they are big, expensive machines that want to run all the time. They take maybe 18, 24 hours from when you flip the switch to when they're actually running, and they take a while to cool down. And then there were peaking plants, which are like these little jet engines that are cheap machines, but really expensive to run, and they turn on during the 100, 200 hours where out of the 8,760 each year, where there's a lot of demand, and then there's intermediate, which kind of goes up and down. So the reason you have this is you can't store electricity. If I were to go over there and turn off the lights right now in Rome, Georgia, at Plant Bowen, this turbine, which is maybe 50 feet long and 20 feet high, big machine, it's like a cylinder, would slow down, would speed up imperceptibly because load and supply are out of balance. When we flip the lights back on, it would slow down imperceptibly. So you have to have a generation stack that can provide whatever people demand at that instant, plus a few sitting around in case one of them blows up, hypothetically speaking. Well, it didn't blow up, but there was sort of a little hydrogen leak coming out of the said turbine, and it ignited. And
I'm being sarcastic.
my buddy Tim Banks was plant manager, and nobody is better at safety than Tim, and just sort of breaks my heart. So the black line shows the varying during the day, and so. Without practical storage, this is what you have to have. So this is another view of the supply stack. Along here is base load, and here's intermediate, and there's peaking. So this is a little bit of a eye chart. This is the cost. If you think about it, if you remember your micro, this is a supply curve. In simplified micro, it looks like that, or maybe like that. And so you run the cheapest stuff first, and then the more expensive stuff, and then the more expensive stuff. So that's the cost in variable cost, and then that's the amount of stuff running. So far, so good? You sure? So a couple things have happened. This used to look like this, but it don't anymore. And the reason that this part of the curve has been pushed down is natural gas. Anybody know what's going on with natural gas? Tom?
It's really cheap right now, so.
How come?
is the excess from fracking and other means. So there's just a lot of it on the market. People are buying combined cycle gas turbines, and they can produce much more with a lot less.
So this variable cost is on the margin, and gas is now on the margin, and so that's pushed this whole curve down. Then one other thing that happened, it's a little hard to see here, but you've got a bunch of solar and wind. We have a public policy that has inserted wind and solar renewables here. And since the market runs on short-term variable cost, what's the fuel cost for solar? Give me a rough estimate, Christina. Zero? Christina said it's zero. That's right. I'm grading you all on Class P, and you already had a gold star since I made you volunteer. Jonathan, what would you think would be the fuel cost for wind?
It would also be zero.
Did you copy off of Christina? You know, Rodney Dangerfield said, if the kid next to me in college had applied himself, I could have done a lot better. So this thing has been pushed down, and then when you insert a bunch of zero stuff here, it pushes everybody to the right. What that means is that baseload coal and nuclear are often not in the money anymore. Those are the machines that want to run all the time. What we have operating is the law of unintended consequences. So the combination of a market that's designed on short-term cost alone and ignores capital cost, which favors zero cost, zero marginal cost resources, and the declining gas prices is that we're retiring coal and nuclear. We don't have a way to run the system without it until the material science kicks in, and nobody knows how to fix this. At the moment, there is some talk about this fake auction in PJM. We help them think about nuclear and some other things. About maybe what I do is I run the auction, and then I take out all the subsidized resources and take out the load, and then I do an administratively calculated price curve and put it all back, which I looked that up in my micro textbook, and it doesn't say anything about that under markets either. So no one knows how to fix this, and the industry has kind of been the boy who cried wolf. They said, boy, we can't handle all this solar and can't handle all this wind, and they can handle a lot more than they claimed. But the truth is it's a 24/7 real-time system, and there is no plan to operate without sufficient base load, and nobody knows what that is anymore. So how many of you have heard of the duck curve? Raise your hand if you've heard of the duck curve. So what is it?
Oh boy. You asked if I'd heard of it.
Okay, let me ask you a different question. Is it Michael or Mike?
Mike.
Okay. Can you tell us why the duck curve is named the duck curve?
It's named the duck curve because apparently it looks like a duck.
And
Yeah.
what
I don't
leads you
think-
to conclude
I don't
that?
think it looks like a duck particularly, but that's why it's named that.
So this is the iconic duck curve. So I've got some difficult questions here. Is it Elizabeth? Mm-hmm. So thinking about solar, when does the sun start shining?
During the day.
Yeah, and at what particular time? What would we call it when the sun starts shining?
The morning?
The morning? And any particular time in the morning?
I don't know, like sunrise.
Sunrise, that's it. James, she said sunrise. Yeah, and when does the sun stop shining?
Sunset.
Sunset.
I gave her that.
So who can tell me when the sun shines the brightest during the day? This is the advanced question. Noon. Close. Noon. So there's noon. And what happens is the sun is very bright, and this is California, and so all the utility scale solar kicks in. And so the amount of load that goes to central station generation is lower and lower and lower. Now, it turns out when we need electricity ain't at noon. When we need it is around 10 a.m. and around 4 p.m. Those are the peaks. So solar is pumping out all this electricity when we don't need it. And now you got these baseload units that are trying to run. And if I'm a coal unit and I shut it down, it's like a day before I can come back. If I'm a nuclear unit, it's, I don't even know how long, days and days. So we have negative wholesale prices. So it just boggles the mind. You know, it's easy to say, but negative wholesale prices is when I'm selling you something and I go, I'd like to sell this to you and I'd like to pay you for taking it. Normally it's something you would pay for. And so the incidence of negative wholesale prices in California is going very high. The other thing that's, and so ultimately, you know, you might wonder, how do you make money when you have negative prices? It's a little bit like Saturday Night Live, the change bank. We give you 2 nickels for a dime, 2 dimes and a nickel for a quarter. You ask, how do we make money? We make it on volume. So how you make money with negative prices on volume is you retire the unit because, you know, the money's going the wrong way. The other bad thing that's happening is this thing. These baseload units, they want to run all the time. There's no giant dimmer switch on the control panel where you go turn it up to bright. It takes some doing to get the thing to ramp up. So these ramps, the belly of the duct is getting lower and lower and lower and into baseload in California. And the neck of the duct where you have to ramp up is getting steeper and steeper and steeper. We did, Chris will probably talk about this, but they did something that's pretty neat that talks about how do you know if you have too much solar. And it's something called solar protection factor. It's a measure of what does the belly of the duct look like and then how much solar have you got. And it turns out the Southeast has the least margin. California actually can handle it. The Southeast, though, can't because there's so much base load because of the Southern Company in CERC. And does anybody know what the number 2 state is for solar?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. No, last quarter is actually number 1, 108 megawatts to 107 for California, but it's number 2 overall. So we're headed into territory that nobody knows what to do. Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, this is without storage?
This
Right.
is without storage.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm not going to get the numbers right, but in the money, small-scale storage is a ways away. Large-scale storage, the amount needed would be huge, and the technology's not there. You know, there's pumped hydro and compressed air and stuff. So storage, fixing this at a utility scale would be like a really good technology breakthrough, which could happen, but has not yet. So we talked about make, and I want to drill down on that a little bit. So this is, now this is some complicated engineering stuff. This is a thermal plant. So all thermal plants work the same way. This is like a tea kettle with a fire underneath it. And the fire heats up the water, and the water turns into steam. And the steam goes through this pinwheel, you know, like the kind you get at a county fair, and the pinwheel turns, and it turns a generator, and a generator is just an electric motor. And if you give it power, it turns around, and if you turn it around, it produces power. So coal units, you're burning coal that's pulverized to like the consistency of face powder. Nuclear units, you've got a chain reaction in water, and then gas, you're burning gas. So every thermal plant works this way. So this is a hot topic. You'll hear more from Kristen and Chris about this. We talked before, you got to have base load, intermediate, and peakers, but what if when the load went up, instead of turning on a peaker, you turned off the lights? Would that work? if you turned off enough of them, it would. So 6% of the supply in PJM, which is this giant market in the Mid-East, in the Mid-Atlantic states in the East, is now demand response. Ironically, they changed the market rules to favor coal and nuclear, and the result was more demand response got bid, which nobody expected to happen. And so, again, my theme here is the paradigms are being broken. We think of load as supply now. The world is changing, coal and nuclear retiring. They'll be around for a while. You're going to see more gas and wind and solar. The reason you're going to see more solar is this. This is the experience curve for solar. There's 1976. Here we are about 40 years later. You may remember from your econ textbook or finance, experience curve is real dollar price on the y-axis, copies made on the x-axis. A logarithmic scale, 1, 10, 100, 10,000, a gazillion. BCG made big money on this when they were founded in the early 70s, and they went around and told everybody that everything is an experience curve effect, which worked well, but it turns out it's false. Only some things are experience curve effects, and they damaged a few clients. But for the ones that they did well, they made big money. And for a new technology, there is an experience curve effect, and this is almost linear, which means that if this wasn't logarithmic, it would be exponential, it would be swooping down like that. This excursion here is public policy distortion when Spain and Germany start pulling a lot of solar and they bust up the silicon market in commodity space. This is the thin film. The client I mentioned does thin film stuff, and so it's new, but it's showing that same thing. This is why solar is big. It used to cost almost $100, and today it costs less than $1. Now it excludes balance of plant and stuff. So I'll say one more thing, and then I'll leave the world of generation and make. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but this is what we've built, going back to 1950. So what you'll see is we built a lot of coal, and that worked great for a long time until we put Lisa Jackson in charge of the EPA. And then there was a single point of vulnerability for coal, and we passed environmental rules, and the price of gas tanked, and so coal is history. You know, it'll all go away. Then we built a bunch of nuclear. That's the green here. So that worked great until, like at the Southern Company where Tony used to work, the budget for Vogtle 1 and 2 was $800 million. And when they finished, it did start with an 8, but it was like $8 billion. And so that bankrupted a whole bunch of utilities, not the Southern Company, although they're now flirting with, not bankruptcy, but they're having slight difficulties with Westinghouse being bankrupt in the middle of Vogtle 3 and 4. And so, you know, it seemed like a good idea at the time until everybody bankrupted. Then here, this orange, which is just breathtaking. We, in 1999, gas was about $2, a little less than it is now. And so everybody thought, well, hell, let's build gas. And so they all built it at once, and then you had Hurricane Katrina, and gas shot up to $14. And so all these people kind of bankrupted, and the banks, you know, that loaned them money ended up owning generation plants. And so the history of the industry is one of herd instinct. We all build the same thing because it seems like a good idea. And in your, have you all had finance yet? Well, you must have because you graduated. So can someone tell me, are you in a portfolio theory, are you supposed to have one stock in your portfolio? You go buy the cheapest one, the one that declared bankruptcy yesterday, and just put all your money in that? What do you think, Elizabeth? No? What are you supposed to do?
Diversify.
So over time, we have a little bit, but in general, in the short term, we've not done well. And so now it's gas and maybe solar, and we're fixing to do the same thing again. I can report from experience, you shouldn't buy one stock. I bought a bunch of GE on the single worst day to buy it in the last 40 years, 2 days before the Honeywell merger. So don't let me manage your portfolio. So let's talk, we talked about make, let's talk about move. So again, this is gonna be pretty technical. So transmission and distribution. Transmission is the big towers, the big steel towers, 100 feet tall, big wires, high voltage, up to maybe 500 kilovolts. Is that right, Tony? 750 maybe? 750. And then distribution, is the telephone pole in front of your house, or maybe if you're in a new suburb, it's underground so that the storms won't knock it down. It's small wires and lower voltages. Tony, what would you say is the cut line between transmission and distribution?
Here in Georgia, it's 25.
25.
In Alabama, it's like 36.
Yeah. Some will go down to 13. I've seen
Oh,
it
you mean
go.
how low does it go?
No, where do you draw the demarcation between transmission and?
Yeah, and Georgia, it's 25, and Georgia Power. I don't know about the co-ops.
I don't know whether they're the same or not. So y'all should pass your questions to Christina and Greg, if you've not already done so. So we're now going to move on from these complicated engineering concepts like big wires and small wires and talk about regulation, which actually is a little bit complicated. So this is a highly regulated industry, and that's good. Competitive is simple. Regulated is simple. Regulated by two different regulators with a dose of competitive in some places. It's extraordinarily complicated, which is good work for consultants. So the primary regulators are the federal regulators regulate wholesale, and the state regulators regulate retail end use. So does anyone know where the boundary is between wholesale and retail? Nobody? That's because there's nobody on the planet that knows where it is. They used to say there's a bright line, but it turns out there is no bright line, and we're having a series of court fights over it, most of which are the justices sitting in oral arguments trying to understand what people are telling them because it's really confusing. And what it is it's like if you didn't know where the property line is with your next door neighbor, nobody cares as long as you don't get near the line. But if both of you want to build a house right next to the line, it matters. And that's what's happening now. The wholesale markets are producing what some call market failure, causing retirements of coal and nuclear. And then what others say is creative destruction. It's Joseph Schumpeter. That's how markets work. These things have had their day. Now it's time for other stuff. So the states don't like it. The states feel like when their nuclear plants close, they lose jobs, or they lose a source of clean energy. So for example, in New York, they have passed a law that says we're going to provide money to upstate New York nuclear plants. Does anybody know why it was upstate? That's right.
Because it's not New York City.
Because it's not New York City, because Andy Cuomo does not like Indian Point because it's near New York City. So he cut a deal. I'll pay you guys to keep running if you all will, in a month or two, announce a closure of Indian Point. And so the legislation went through, and sure enough, they announced a deal. I have a client who was general counsel at Georgia Power, and I was asking him for some advice on regulatory relations because there's nobody better than the Southern Company at state regulatory relations. And I had another client who needed it, and he may have been drinking at the time we were at dinner. And he said, you tell your client this advice is worth $10 million, which I did, but they didn't pay me $10 million. He said, you need to understand that people on the Public Utility Commission do not want to be on the Public Utility Commission. They want to be President of the United States. And it occurs to them that ratepayers vote. And so when something happens due to the market where there are a bunch of jobs that are going to get lost, they're thinking, those guys might not vote for me when I run for president. So they're going to intervene and change things. So right now, we have a huge fight going on between the wholesale market and the retail market. And there'll be court cases in New York and in Illinois, trying to get legislation in Pennsylvania, a little behind in New Jersey and elsewhere. No one knows how it's going to turn out. I'm usually wrong on my jailhouse lawyering, but the rule is, where it's gotten struck down before, is if the law is tethered to the wholesale market, then it violates the indirect commerce clause. And my read of New York is it violates it. If you read the terms very carefully, it's a financial derivative on the wholesale market. It's like a floor. So we'll see. All that's going to go to the Supreme Court. So state regulation is rate of return. So if I'm a utility, I get promised an exclusive franchise. If I'm Georgia Power, I get all of Georgia, or my service territory in Georgia. No one else can serve it. And then in exchange for that, I get returns to and of capital. Every time I invest $100, they promise me they'll give me that $100 back plus a reasonable cost of capital based on some debt equity relationship. And then I get all my expenses that are prudent. Anybody see any problems with that?
There's no incentive for efficiency.
That's right. No incentive for efficiency, so now there's something called performance-based regulation where they measure how efficient I am. What about exclusive franchise territory? How exclusive is my franchise territory if anybody can put a solar panel on their roof and BYO? You know, it's like having a bar where, like, you're selling liquor, but everybody can bring their own. So you just go back to the regulator and say, you know, you see, I don't really have an exclusive franchise territory, and therefore my risk-adjusted cost of capital should be higher. You know, you've got this low risk-adjusted cost of capital on me because it's a safe business. And the regulator goes, you know, if I raised her cost of capital, wouldn't the rates go up? And don't ratepayers vote? And don't I want to be president of the United States? Why, no, I will not raise your cost of capital. So let's, sorry, I've run over a little bit. Let's do Stump the Chumps. Christina?
First one, how are utilities planning and adapting to the implementation of more EVs?
Of more EVs? That is a great, so Christina said, how are utilities planning and adapting to more EVs? So they are up in the air. Here in Georgia, we helped Georgia Power, I think I can say this, developed a strategy, and it's going to be a branded set of charging stations, and they're going to build the infrastructure. Other places, utilities are backing off from it and saying, you know, this is not my business, it's someone else's. We have a world of flat load growth. Load growth is about 1%, which is terrible. An EV looks to a utility like half a house. And the question is, you know, do you build it and they will come? Do you put in all this charging infrastructure even though the number of EVs on the road is pretty small? There are 140 million cars sold in the US. They turn over about every 10 years, so that's 14 million a year. If you got 20% of that market, you're getting 2 or 3 million a year. It's not enough to justify a lot of infrastructure. And so most of them have stepped right up to the line and said, we need to do something, and I'm not sure what. Greg?
That's a very high-level question. You want an easy one, right? Where's the most work in energy right now, and where will it be in the next 10 years?
So that's a good question. Do you know what consultants say when they don't know what the answer to the question is? They say that's a good question because they're hoping something will come to them. So I can tell you what the buzz is. And we're about to do a project, I think, where if we were finished, I could tell you what the answer is. We're going to do a workforce of the future strategy for a utility looking out about 10 years and answer that exact question. But since we ain't done it yet, actually I haven't even sold it yet, but they asked me to shape the corporate initiative, so I'm hopeful. So what the cool kids would say is it's data scientists and technologists. You've got this world where you're going to put solar panels on every house. So this is another challenging question, Elizabeth. Let's say, imagine a solar panel on the roof, and let's say a big rainstorm blows through. What do you think would happen to the output of that solar panel?
It would be diminished.
It would be diminished. Severely or just gently?
Depends on how much.
Black clouds.
Oh, yeah, it'd be gone.
So as the storm blows through, if you're trying to match supply and demand, it's not general supply and demand, it's everywhere. So as the front moves through, now this area suddenly has a reverse duck curve. And let's say it's a narrow band of showers, and then suddenly it clears up, and now here comes all this power, and now this area has. Imagine that everybody's got solar, and they're all making these independent decisions of when to produce and when to store and when to sell. So the grid of the future is much more complicated, and so there are going to be oceans of data, and nobody knows what to do with it. The other thought is that today's journeyman may go away, and what you may have is more technologists. So that's what people would say. It's an open question to me whether that's a big thing or a loud thing. It's certainly true, but I don't yet know how big it is. I don't think anyone does. Christina?
I'm gonna let you read this question yourself. Sorry. It's okay.
Good strategy. Let the client talk.
And we didn't stop at this slide, but this is the one with the power grids, the 3 main grids in North America. And slide 32. And the question was just regarding the 12 ties that exist, or the ties between the grids.
Get ready, Tony.
Is that, Tony, do the ties afford protection from like cyber attacks? I know that's a big concern with the system, but so they're kind of siloed, they're kind of separated, but they are connected. Are they at risk?
Let me confer with my colleague. I think it's no, right?
Not yet.
You know, a little bit, but. Tony, what's the answer?
The answer is no.
They're not at
A
risk.
little bit.
They're a little bit at risk.
So if you had a massive fault, then the tie is a way to stop it from propagating. But you know, like you're stopping it from wiping out the other half of the country, so you're already in a world of hurt.
The question was whether they have the interconnects have flow, right? So there's zero flow, so yeah, they would stop.
Okay, right. But they stop it, a little bit like, we talked about how the whole system's interconnected. About 3 years ago in about 20 miles from Phoenix, a guy is working in a substation, and he's working through a procedure, and he takes a break. He goes to do something, I don't know what. And he comes back and starts the procedure again, and he skips a step. And it turns out that would be a really important step because he blacks out all of the Southwest. Millions and millions of people. It's a day or two before they recover. Now, he was aided and abetted by some sleepy people in control centers who, if they had paid attention, could have stopped it from propagating. But because everything is interconnected, failure can propagate that quickly. As Tony pointed out, it would stop it, but by the time the tie stops it, you've got a lot of people out. We're conducting a workshop on cybersecurity, and particularly the NERC standards, I think 2 weeks from today, with some people who are trying to get organized because they might have just sort of flunked this little audit. Greg?
This question is about power sharing. as well. When companies agree on power sharing, who pays for the infrastructure and how do they split or share the cost?
Power sharing. So who asked that question?
Is that, yeah.
So can you say a little more about what you mean by power sharing? Because I could answer it a couple of different ways.
Yeah, so for example, if this grid it does not have enough supply to meet the demand and they need to borrow supply from another company.
So, so the question is when two companies agree to power share in the short-term time horizon, how do they do that? There are organized wholesale markets that represent regions of the country. They run in different ways. If we were two companies and you were short and I was long, then we'd have to have a transmission line between us. It would have to be unconstrained. Depending on the market, there would be a bid offer spread. I would offer power at X dollars and you would pay for it. There's a different answer for sharing capacity in the long term, which is power for next year or the year after. We recently helped APS enter the energy imbalance market, which is a market based in California. Somebody in Canada is joining, the LAWPD just announced they're joining, that does just this short-term stuff. And as we'll talk about in our next session, we did some of the process design and change management for them. They finished their first quarter of results and they produced $6 million in savings. What they promised the commission was 3, so 100% more. Now, some of it is, it turns out if you're in a market when prices are negative at noon, because over there in California they got too much solar, you can make good money. Then in the East, there are organized markets that do more than just the short-term power sharing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so when it comes to the transmission stuff, I guess the two companies share but split the cost.
Yeah, there's a rule that says I have to offer you my transmission on a non-discriminatory basis with published tariffs that are put up on the internet. And so when you buy the power, you know what it's going to cost. It's like we were shipping by train and using published rates.
Can I follow up? So this is essentially the question that I had written, but so with the duck curve, can transmission from, if California is producing at noon and Colorado, Wyoming, down through Texas is needing power, can you then shift some of that so California is shipping it out to bring that margin back?
That's what's happening with negative prices from California to Arizona. So you said from California to where?
Well, I don't know how far you could ship, but that could, potentially reduce that.
So you're on the right track, and I couldn't tell you how far you could ship, but the farther it is, the more line loss it is. And so it used to be that what they called one wheel, which is one kind of circle, was easy, and 2 wheels was maybe at the margin, and then 3 was, but this is when I'd have to tell you what a wheel is, and I can't remember. So there is a limiting condition. I can't tell you what it is. You should ask Kristen whether DERs are good or bad for transmission. I'm not sure what she would say. I think she'll say yes, but it's probably an arguable point. Back to your finance. If you remember your CAPM, there's an efficient frontier. So when I get to like 30 stocks, then I'm at the efficient frontier. So risk return is optimized as the size of the portfolio grows up to a point of diminishing returns. So what does that have to do with supply? Well, if you've got transmission lines and you can provide supply from California to Arizona or from Arizona to California, you should be able to provide the same service level, the same reduction of risk, that the lights won't go out, less expensively if you've got a broader footprint and a broader portfolio of assets, assuming that the assets are not perfectly correlated. As long as they're not correlated, the more you got, the better you are up to a point of diminishing returns. Does that answer your question, which I forgot to repeat?
One quick follow-up on that. I thought that Arizona had an even more severe debt curve because they don't have the wind resources that California does.
They don't have the what?
The wind resources. So they're even more severely peaked during those hours in the midday.
I have not seen a drawn Arizona duck curve. We did research on the California duck curve where we scraped the data off of the CAISO website, the hourly data. I don't know whether that's available for Arizona. I don't believe Arizona has the solar build out. I don't think they have the amount of utility scale solar that California does. And the duck curve in California is all utility scale. Hawaii, it's rooftop, but most people think that the duck curve is rooftop, but it ain't in California, which means that if you're in North Carolina, the number 2 state, place where there's a lot of base load, duck curve can hurt you. Arizona, though, I just don't know. APS and in general, the utilities have not gotten along well with the solar lobbyists. They waited till too late. Politics is about money. And so one thing we're telling our clients is if you don't want to wait until the big money's here trying to invest in solar, you want to get the regulations to a level playing field now. And microgrids is a case where this would be a really good opportunity because there is no big money, there's no killer app, there's no cheap storage. You care a lot about how those rules turned out. In Arizona, they cared a lot about how those rules turned out, and they were written real bad if you were the utility. Who's next?
Over here. So 2 related questions. What expected or proposed federal regulatory changes could dramatically impact energy markets? And then along that, with the Clean Power Plan completely essentially on hold right now, how are utilities thinking about this? Are they in a holding pattern or going to make the changes anyways because there's enough demand for it?
So it is unlikely that there will be sweeping energy legislation because we can't get health care and tax reform through, and the boys and girls in Washington do not seem to be getting along very well. The Republican Party has decided to fight itself to death, and they can't agree on anything, and therefore they can't get anything through. So they'll never get to that. It is likely that when FERC gets a quorum, right now there are only 2 commissioners, you've got to have 3. When FERC gets a quorum, that they will attack market rules in this mess that we've been talking about, which is the states are subsidizing resources out of market. That blows up the wholesale market. It's likely that that will go to the courts, and it is unclear where that's going to land. But they held a technical conference recently. They've got 5 things. The commissioner, Cheryl LaFleur, is the acting chairman, and they asked her, what do you feel like with all these new commissioners coming? And she said, you have to understand that here at FERC, we're not like the Beatles. We're more like the Monkees or the Spice Girls. And what she meant by that was we didn't grow up playing together. The FERC is just a commission that's assembled. And so there was a smart alecky email stream among some of the energy partners. We see a striking resemblance between Cheryl LaFleur, the acting chairman of the commission, and Sporty Spice. Look it up on the internet. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. So we're going to get a bunch of new commissioners. They're going to do something. They're going to do something about these market rules where, do you all know the game of Go or Othello? You ever played Othello with the black and white? You ever played Go? Go was big in artificial intelligence land when that company was able to beat a human. But the way it works is you got a bunch of round squares that are either black or white. And if I've got a black one and a bunch of white ones, and I'm the black player, I put a black one here, they all flip to white. And then if I put white on either side, they all flip back, so it's a game of flanking. So with the states and the feds, what we're seeing is a game of flanking. The feds do something, and then the states pass a law, and the feds do something else. Next move is the feds. They're going to change the market rules. The Clean Power Plan is a little bit of an enigma. It's not clear how they're going to get rid of it. The analysis I read this morning said that utility sector carbon will go down about 15% to 2030 without the Clean Power Plan. It would have gone down about 26%. So there are a bunch of regulations in place, and cheap gas is already causing something to happen. The Supreme Court ruling of 2007 says the EPA has to do something. There's an endangerment finding. And you see Trump's handlers backing him off on clean, I, Donald Trump, believe that the climate is changing and human beings are partially responsible because they're twisting my arm behind my back and making me say this. So nobody thinks, one thing they could do is go back and challenge the endangerment finding, get a bunch of scientists and say, it ain't happening. Nobody thinks that'll happen because it's a political third rail. It's too heavy of a lift, whatever your views are on that. You probably can't do that. If that doesn't happen, Mass versus EPA of 2007 stands, and the EPA has to regulate. The existing regulation, I don't think would have made it through the Supreme Court. There are two things wrong with it. One is there's a typo, in effect, in the law, and they're using something called 111D. 111D is the none of the above clause. You can use it to regulate anything that's not regulated elsewhere. So what does regulated elsewhere means? It either means the source or the pollutant. When I read the language, it means the source. Power plants are regulated under other clauses in the Clean Air Act. And if the Supreme Court construed the law that way, it'll get thrown out. If it's the pollutant, then that would hold up. And then the other thing that is legally challengeable is never before in the history of the EPA have they regulated one thing by changing something else. Turns out you can't get 25% by changing anything in the power plant. If you did everything you could get 5 or 6%, except most people have done half of that already. So what the law said was that they had to add renewables or energy efficiency and some other things. So we're regulating this thing by passing a rule about what other people have to do. It's like I'm regulating Michael by saying, Ryan, you have to do this, which you might believe is good public policy, and it might be. But if you're the state, you believe that you're in charge of the energy portfolio and that that's a taking, that the government can't say you have to do this. So the Clean Air Act was never designed to do greenhouse gas, and it was pressed into service in an aggressive way. Probably they pushed the envelope more than they should have, and I think it would have been flawed. What you're likely to see is a Trump administration put in something that's much more modest. They withdraw from Paris, they put in something that's inside the fence line, and they figure that the next administration is either of like minds or doesn't have the political horses to overcome it. And you get 15% until technology changes.